Keeper of the Lost Cities, Neverseen, Chapter 37. If you're not following along already, please do so as it really does help me out, and like this video. Fitz's recovery moved slowly, just like Physic had warned, and yet Sophie kept worrying it was too slow. He got dizzy every time he stood and felt a stabbing pain in his chest if he even took a deep breath. And the elixirs Physic gave him during her check-ins seemed to be making him worse. Sophie was starting to put serious thought into Keith's kidnap Ellen plan, but she knew she should at least wait until Fitz was done with the vile tea. If he wasn't better after the last sip, she was running a heist in the Lost Cities. It didn't help her mood that Callus still wasn't back. The collective also wouldn't bring her to see Prentice. She'd offered many times, and they'd told her she needed to save her mental energy. But when Della asked to go, they agreed, which Sophie tried not to find insulting. Meanwhile, Dex spent all his time wrestling with the Twiggler, and Biana was obsessed with Iggy. Dex had given the tiny imp a coat of silky blue fur, and Biana spent every free second trying to train Iggy to eat vegetarian, which left Sophie on her own, with a notebook full of cognate exercises and a bedridden telepathy partner. The only useful thing she could do was help Keith search his memories. Part of her was desperate for them to find a clue about the Neverseen's plan. The other part of her was terrified of how Keith would handle that. "You never told me about the memory you thought was going to be useful," she said, as she paced around his room, noticing he had added new notes to the wall. "That's because it was stupid." He grabbed a crumpled piece of paper off the floor. "I was trying to figure out how she stayed in touch with the Neverseen, and I remembered she had this bracelet my dad hated, so I knew he didn't give it to her. I thought maybe it was a communicator, but I don't see how." He uncrinkled the paper and showed Sophie a sketch he'd done of the bracelet, made of round, sparkly beads. "Wow, I didn't realize you could draw." "It's not good." Keith snatched it away and crumpled it again. He was wrong. His drawing looked like a photograph, but he was also right. Sophie didn't see how the bracelet could be a clue. "Well," she said, "that's why I'm here. It's easier to see what's important when we can look at the memory on paper." She held up her memory log and flipped to a blank page. "We'll start with something easy," she promised, when Keith turned almost as green as Fitz had during the Great Vacker Hurlfest. "I was thinking it would be smart to record your memories from the Neverseen's attack. You might spot something you didn't notice before, and you'll get to feel for how this is going to work. And it shouldn't be too weird for you since I was there." Keith's shoulders relaxed. "Yeah, I guess that could work. So, how do we do this?" "Well, first you need to think about those memories so that they're in the front of your mind. And then you need to give me permission to enter your consciousness. And yes, I know, you think it sounds creepy." Keith smiled half a smile. "It sounds less creepy from you." She reached for his temples. He flinched. "Sorry, I wasn't expecting that. You don't do that with Fitz. I'm so used to his mind I don't need to make contact anymore. Just relax. This isn't going to be a big deal." Keith nodded and held still, sucking in a slight breath as her fingers settled against his skin. That was when she realized how close they were standing. "You okay there, Foster?" he asked, the other half of his smile curling his lips. "Seems like your mood just shifted. Just bracing to relive those attacks. You ready?" He swallowed hard before he nodded. Sophie did the same, adding a couple of deep breaths before opening her mind to his. She still wasn't prepared for how vividly Keith remembered everything. Fitz didn't have a photographic memory, so his memories were always slightly faded. But Keith's mind was in high definition, and the soundtrack could have been THX certified. Her hands trembled as she watched herself leave the Black Swan's ocean cave with Keith. Sylvanie had barely lifted off the ground when 5 black-cloaked figures knocked them out of the sky. For Sophie, the fight had happened through a haze of pain and exhaustion and nearly dying. But Keith had lived the full-color reality. His rage made her stomach heave, especially when one of the cloaked figures flung a rock at his head. They knew, now, that figure was his mom. But as the fight replayed, Sophie saw nothing to clue them in. Lady Gisela never used her real voice, even when Keith sliced her arm with a goblin throwing star, and she fought without remorse, even when challenging her son. Good old Mom, Keith thought. Doesn't it give you warm, fuzzy feels? His memories shifted, bringing them to Mount Everest. During the part of the battle Sophie had missed, an ogre had dragged her through the cave ceiling, and she'd never realized how hard her friends had fought to get to her. No one fought harder than Keith. His aim with the throwing stars was flawless, nailing one dwarf in the hand right before it threw a rock at Fitz. Clipping another dwarf in the leg so it couldn't chase them, he waded through the snow drifts, trudging through the freezing winds, refusing to stop until he caught up with the Neverseen, and then panic slowed his hands when he pointed his weapon at the figure he thought was his father. More dwarves burst out of the snow, and Keith chased down his dad. His only thought, I need to end this. When he'd caught up, he'd been ready to do what was necessary. But then the wind threw back his father's hood, and Keith saw who it really was. Oh, Sophie said as Keith's emotions exploded. Shock, anger, betrayal, hate. But the strongest emotion was grief. As the sadness swelled in Keith's mind, so did the cyclone of old memories. Keith tried to push them back, but they were too strong. Sophie saw a young Keith. He couldn't have been older than 3 or 4, curled up on the floor of his room, crying. His mom came in to tell him to be quiet and realized he'd wet the bed. Dad's going to be so mad, he whispered. His mom agreed and started to walk away, then sighed and called for the gnomes. She asked them to change out the bedding and have the room look like normal by morning. Your father doesn't have to know about everything, she told Keith, but don't let this happen again. In another memory, Keith was 6 or 7. Oh my gosh. Keith was 6 or 7, waiting by a fountain in Atlantis. And waiting some more. Crowds came and went, the balefire street lights dimmed, and still Keith sat alone. Finally, his parents rolled up in a Euripides carriage, along with another dark-haired elf that Keith didn't recognize. Keith's father was so deep in conversation with his friends that he didn't even look at his son. Keith's mom said, "Sorry, we forgot you." The memory shifted again, to Keith wearing an amber-brown level 3 Foxfire uniform. He'd just gotten home from school and found his parents waiting in his room. Keith's father demanded Keith show him his notebooks, and when Keith handed them over, his dad freaked. Pages were covered in sketches, each one more intricate and amazing than the last. But his father tore out each drawing, crumpling them beyond ruin as he shouted about Keith needing to pay attention during his sessions. Keith argued that he could draw and learn at the same time, and his father stormed off, calling Keith a disappointment. His mother said nothing as she followed her husband out, but she did retrieve one of the drawings from the floor, a sketch of her, and tucked it into her pocket. The theme of each memory became achingly clear. 2 awful parents, but one was better, or that was what Keith had believed. Keith stepped back, severing Sophie's connection. So, that just happened? It's okay, she whispered. He shook his head. I never wanted anyone to see that. I know, but I'm glad I did. You shouldn't have to carry that all alone. You shouldn't have to know I used to wet the bed. Lots of kids wet the bed. Not according to my father. He kicked the wall so hard it had to be painful. Sophie inched closer, hesitating before resting a hand on his shoulder. You know what I think when I see things like that? I never should have agreed to help such a loser, even if he has awesome hair. Not even close. Okay, fine, the hair part is kind of true. But other than that, all I think is, Keith's even braver than I thought. And I already thought you were incredibly brave. Between the way you held your cool in those battles and the way you've stayed my friend despite all the rumors and gossip about me, you're just I don't even know how to say it. But you're so much more than what your family made you believe. And by the way, I want to see more of your drawings. I don't have any, he told the floor. I stopped drawing years ago. You have that one you just drew of your mother's bracelet. That one was stupid. I'd still like to keep it. Can I? She bent and picked it up, tucking it away in her memory log. Anyway, she said after an endlessly long stretch of silence, I guess I should record those attacks with the Neverseen. She projected the battle scenes on the pages using a telepathy trick. Keith watched over her shoulder and took the book from her when she got to the moment he'd learned the cloaked figure was his mom. You made her look afraid, he said. That's how she looked. Photographic memory, remember? Keith frowned. I remember her looking angry. She did look angry. But first, she looked scared. Like she didn't want you to see her. Keith stared at the projection for a painfully long time. Then, shut the book and handed it back. You're not going to record the other memories, right? No. I think we should keep those between us. He nodded. Is this going to be too hard for you? She whispered. Is it going to be too hard for you? Sophie chewed her lip. I hate seeing them hurt you. If I ever face your father again, well, he'd better hope I'm not wearing my sucker punch, because I'd knock him to Timbuktu. I would pay so much money to see that. She smiled sadly. I don't want you dealing with all this alone, Keith. You've spent long enough hiding the bruises and scars behind jokes and pranks. He never hit me, Keith interrupted. I know, but words cut deeper than goblin throwing stars. So, I hope you'll keep letting me help you. He raised his eyes to the window, looking as scared as his mom. Sophie could definitely see the family resemblance between them, but Keith was missing her hard edges. Just promise me that if this gets to be too much for you, you'll run away, he whispered. It won't be too much. It might be. I have a major dark side, Sophie. So does everyone. He raised one eyebrow. Even mysterious Miss F? Yeah, I'm an inflictor, remember? Keith turned away. I wanted to manifest that ability so bad. I begged my ability detecting Dementor to try to trigger it. But no, I got my dad's ability. Hey, being an empath is a way better talent. I've wondered sometimes why the Black Swan didn't give it to me. Maybe you'll trigger it eventually, along with 14 or 15 talents. Man, I hope not. 4 is enough. Psh, you should at least go for 5. But don't waste your last slot on empathy. Go for something cool, like hydrokinetic. Okay, seriously, how many abilities are there? A lot. And that's why they make such a big deal when someone doesn't get one. There are so many chances to have a talent. I still don't think it's right to treat them like a secondary citizen because of it, Sophie mumbled. Even if they have the same money or whatever, it's still not fair. I bet that's because you scare the council so much, Keith said after a second. I never thought about things like that until I met you. That's why she's the Moonlark, Calla called from the doorway. Sophie smiled as she turned to greet her friend, but it vanished when she saw tears streaming down Calla's cheeks. What happened? Sophie asked, hoping she'd already guessed the answer, but it was everything she'd feared and so much more. I found Laura and Mitya and Siora, Calla whispered. They're in Luminaria, under quarantine. All 3 of them are infected with the plague.